Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in this session for environment management and servicing. In this session, we would like to try to answer some of the common questions that we observe across the different projects implementing Dynamics 365 for operations, respective everything that is happening behind the scenes on your environments. Every time that you start a new project, you will see that the way to implement this release of Dynamics is different than 2012. So we will go over to those and highlight the things that are different compared to 2012. Also, we would like to explore what is the role of this team managing the infrastructure, this team that we call Dynamic Service Engineering. And in addition, that we would like to differentiate what is basically the role with the support team and the role of this team that is behind the infrastructure. So we will go over to different scenarios. What is the service model in general, and what are the different scenarios that you will be, let's say, experiencing every time that you implement Dynamics. If you are already implementing Dynamics 365 for operations, you will be familiar with some of these scenarios, but we would like to clarify the rules, who does what, for example, the role of Microsoft, the role of you as a partner, as a customer, and what are the different expectations in this, let's say, collaboration. Also, we are going to explore a little bit about the service lead times, meaning that every time that you do a service request, what you should be expecting in terms of timing. I had with me today my colleagues.
This is Chandrakant, and the site reliability engineer lead for AX.
So he is behind, is the engineer lead on dynamic service engineering. So.
And I'm Eric Pigars, and I'm a solution architect like Alejandro.
So I think it's off. So he's my colleague. We're part of the same solution architecture team. My name is Alejandro Gutierrez. We are part of research and development at the Dynamics 365 for operations. We are part, Eric and myself are part of mainly one program that is called Fast Track for Dynamics, where we basically touch almost every project that is happening right now. And in this process, we interact with many of you in different levels of degree. So let's go for the process. If you are implementing right now Dynamics 365 for operations, this is one of the main difference compared to 2012. How we handle, let's say, the part of the infrastructure. Right now, because we are on cloud, we take ownership and we manage all the infrastructure in terms of all the environments that you have for a specific project. Also, we do other servicing to all those environments that I'm going to show you in a common slides. So the important thing here is that the role of the infrastructure that used to be in the previous, let's say, 2012 model has changed. So your team member that used to manage infrastructure in the past, those roles are changing to a new model based on how we implement Dynamics 365 for operation. Since when we start to do this, if you look at the team timeline in your implementation, just after the onboarding process in your projects, it's when all the service and aspects start to kick off. How? Just when you create a new LCS project and deploy an environment, at that point is when the teams behind Chandra start to work with you, deploy an environment, and will continue with you through the journey. This servicing model does not start when the implementation finishes. It will continue through the life cycle of the, let's say, the live implementation or the operation. Like you are in production, you will continue adding, let's say, new solutions, hot fixes, platform updates, or perhaps you have a phase implementation and you are adding new legal entities or functionality. So that servicing model will continue through the life of the subscription. In this slide, this is one of the big differences compared to how we used to work in the past. In the part that you see as infrastructure, this is what dynamic service engineering takes care. All the pieces connected to deploy environments, to do database backups, and move databases from your production environments to the sandbox, and many other servicing aspects. But this is the part that basically Microsoft is managing for you as part of your subscription. In the blue area, it's mostly the implementation part. It's we have the customer that they bring all the users, and also you as a partner that bring all the solution itself, okay, as a customizations or also the implementation part. So this is the pie that has been readjusted with this model. If we look at what is happening to the first dates of the project, we can determine two main roles. One of them is, for example, if I take three main scenarios when we do the onboarding on the implementations. One is, let's say, you as a partner work with a customer to acquire a subscription, let's say the solution, Dynamics 365. So you can, let's say, go and buy the subscription through an enterprise agreement or a cloud solution provider. Let's say if you as a partner are reselling. You take care of that part. But once you activate those licenses is when we create this LCS project. And it's beyond that point is where we start to connect all the servicing experience. Same thing happens when you add new environments. You take care, let's say, you as a partner or customer can acquire more, let's say, environments based on the definition of your project, what you need, but we grant the access to those environments in LCS. You know, by default, for every implementation project, you have 3 environments. If you add more, this dynamic service or team in LCS, we activate those environments as part of that project so you can deploy even more. In the part of the implementation and the planning, well, this is clear. This is your role as a partner or customer to execute the implementations. We provide the tools, you execute. But let's take a look on as service operation, the core scenarios that we observe. One of them is the co-promotion, for example. Through the life cycle of the implementation, let's assume that you are customizing part of the functionality. Well, there is a life cycle of that code. First, you need to, of course, develop. Second, you need to test it. In order to test it, you will apply first to your sandbox or testing environment. Once you apply to that environment is when we can flag that as a candidate release, and so that way we can promote that code to, at some point, to a production environment when you are live. So this process, when we start to touch the production environment, is when we start to interact heavily with the dynamic service engineering team. You can deploy directly in, let's say, in UAT environments, in your sandbox environments, or other environments like a dev and test. But for production environment, you submit that deployment, and DCE will take care to do the deployment. So why? Because we are responsible of that environment in a way that the environment has to be available. We need to plan those, let's say, those installations. It's not something that happens immediately. We need to plan because potentially at that point you will have a live operations. So there are other many aspects and quality checks that we do. But that's kind of in general way the co-promotion flow. If we move to a second core service, is the in LCS, you have a way to do requests to dynamic service engineering team. Those requests can be in 2 ways. One can be a data refresh, that it means assuming that you have a production environment, you can request to refresh data from production environment to the sandbox. Or also Just to clarify, Sandbox, we will include in this category any environment that has SQL Azure as part of the tier. Typically, those are the tier 2 environments and above. We classify environments in tiers. So tier 2 and above always have SQL Azure environments. In those type of environments is when DC can interact and move databases from production back to Sandbox or tier 2 environments and above. Also, you can add a service request to do a point-in-time restore on Sandbox. And you can do it also in production only if the customer is not live. Because if we move to a scenario where the customer is already live, that's another topic because it can be a disaster recovery scenario, which is totally different. So think about it in the timeline that I was showing before. If the customer is implementing and is not live yet, we can do different things compared to when the customer is live. And point-in-time restore is one of those examples. Yes?
So we can use, in theory, the production systems for UAT prior to a go-live?
The question is if we can use the UAT environment as a test.
The prod environment as the UAT environment, let's say, until you were to go live?
The answer is yes, you can use production environment with certain rules. And we have a session to discuss those rules on Wednesday on data management and data migration best practices. And in that session, we are going to explain what are the rules. So I suggest that you join that. Yes, you can. Short answer, you can with some restrictions.
Yeah, and there's a summary of their descriptions coming up.
Yeah. So there are other type of requests that we have in LCS that we don't cover as a regular service request because we are still enhancing LCS. Every month, we deploy new features and we allow new scenarios. So one of them is, there are some certain scenarios that we don't have yet a service request category, like for example, put the environment in maintenance mode, for example. You need to disable some configuration keys, so you need to do a service request with other type, so that way DC will take care of that piece. Other is that ISB license cannot be applied in the same way that we apply in Sandbox or UAT because it's by environment. So we need to hand over that package to implement those licenses directly to DC. So there are some exceptions that we need to consider in this process, and we use other type of requests in LCS. Now, there are scenarios where we need to involve support. One of them is that the most important one is that you want to do a point-in-time restore to a production environment when the customer is production. There are more things behind that. It's not because it's a production environment, there are more investigations why we need to do that if customer is already live. So for that, we need to document the full case, and it's when support team starts the process. Yes, at some point, engineering team will be involved, but we trigger this process differently. Other scenarios are like a data MAR reset of MR and so on.
Sorry, I just had one more question.
Sure.
As far as the maintenance mode, do you only need to open a request for production, or do you need to open a request for any tier 2 and above for maintenance mode?
That's only for production. So tier 2 and above, you can manage.
Yeah, because I've done the tier 1 box, but okay.
Use the.
Yeah, so that type of request are to be. So that type of request, other types should be filed only for production because tier 2 and above, you have the access and you can manage that. And we have the AXWiki article how to do that.
We can run the scripts and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Correct. So let's go with a little bit more detail in some of the scenarios. Tenant and data management. For new, let's say every time that we deploy a new environment, we do certain things. First, you as a partner, you need to plan in general how many environments do you need for an implementation, and you work with the customer in that regard. Every implementation is different. So by default, as I mentioned, you have 3 environments that are the minimal environments that you will need through the life of the let's say, the live operations. Before that point, you can have one for performance or one for goal environment, but after you go live, those things can change. So by default, you get 3. So that's your subscription covers those 3 environments. But you as a partner, you work with the customer to identify how many environments you will need based on the complexity of the project. Yeah? So that's one of the things that we expect, let's say you work with the partner, and also we guide you and we help in that process. No? But in the other side, our teams needs to take care to provision those licenses as part of the project and also to deploy. So every time that you request a deployment, we have processes to trigger that generation of that environment. The other is deploying a production environment. That's, we have different rules for that environment. You, as a partner or customer, you need to complete the sizing, there is a questionnaire in LCS where you need to identify things like the volumes that you will be using once you are live, the number of transactions, all these things that are connected to the usage that will help us to determine the size of the production environment. So once we receive that information from you, we evaluate and we have a team that determines, based on performance triggers, what is the specs behind that production environment, which is different to the other environments. Sandbox, Dev, they have a predefined spec, but for production environment is different, because now we are talking about the real consumption, the real operation, the real volume that you will have once you are live, and we need more information from you. At that point, when you reach that point in the implementation, is because you have gone through all the process of analysis, design, and you have tested, so you know more about the customer, so you have better understanding of what will be the real scenario once you are live. So is why we need you at that point to provide that information, and we can determine the size of this environment. So that's the 2 things that need to happen. The other theory scenario here is, I mentioned about the production database copy. Yes, but it's not just the request, especially when we are talking about production environment. There are more things that happen and that you need to be aware. One of them is that when you do a request to do a copy from prod to sandbox, if you have done that in the past, you will notice that we disable all the users and we enable only one user, the admin. Why? Because it's a live database, and perhaps the customer has so many data in that is confidential. But you know that you have controlled that piece. So all the users that you have in production are disabled, basically, and we enable only one, the admin. There are other things that once you get the access, you will need to take the action to enable the users that, yes, we need to enable access to all this group of people. But this is part of your responsibility. There are other things that we do, like in the process of copying the database back to Sandbox, you will need to re-enable all the endpoints, for example, integrations, because we don't want to run same integrations in production. We're moving back to UAT, so all those are disabled. So you need to reconfigure that piece, pointing to that this database to the UAT or Sandbox environment. So there are things that happens behind the scenes that it's important that you are aware. So it's not equal in terms of users. It's equal in terms of the data and also the code, of course, because assuming that you have the same level of code, but some access is being, let's say, removed or restrained. Let's talk about a little bit plant maintenance and schedule and communications. If you have an ongoing implementation, it's likely that the team that is part of LCS that is signed to receive notifications is getting emails about plant maintenance on that environment. For example, we just have one recently that we did some updates. But there are different things that can happen in this process. And we proactively communicate to everything what we are planning to do in terms of, let's say, I will take one example, critical, let's say, OS security updates. So we do that, we advise, we communicate in advance, 5 days in advance, and we process that request in a time window of 8 hours. Same thing happens with the infrastructure. When I say cloud infrastructure, are things that we are continuously updating in the Azure subscription connected to your environment. So we do other aspects as well. Yes.
Is there any option that in that email you can give us an option to reschedule that?
The question is that if there is an option in the email to request a reschedule of that. Well, we have received that feedback, how we can proactively say, okay, we are getting notification, but perhaps you are in the middle of a critical task during that weekend connected to the project that you don't want to disrupt, right? So
for now, you can file the Microsoft support ticket to reschedule your.
It's basically 5 days notice, and if
Yeah.
it was last time 3 days with different support requests to get it changed, which is very tight if you have readers running on the weekend. So I think we need to find a better solution on that.
Yeah, we already got that feedback and we are working on it. But for now, like 5 days means it's a 5 business days. It's not like we send on Friday and we'll be doing on Wednesday. So if we are doing over the weekend, we'll make sure at least we send it on the Monday or the previous week. So at least you have enough time to contact back.
Yep. Okay. Other scenario is the platform updates. And here, most importantly, especially on platform compared to applications, we have a time window that we need you to consider that you cannot be behind 12 months on platform. So at some point you need to do the upgrade and keep uptaking all this platform. So same thing, we follow same process, but we need to we work with you, and let's say in the projects, let's say that are the ongoing projects, it's likely that you will have one architect from from our team that will work with you to discuss any concern that you have in this area. But basically the message here is that platform updates are very important and you cannot go beyond 12 months on that one. Of course, same process, we communicate that, we work with you, you need to go to the process of validation as well. We do first sandbox, second production, but it's something that we plan with you. So Eric will talk more about the service update strategy and maintenance window. So,
Okay. Hello. So have you all, or are you all familiar with the difference between the platform and the application? What's a major difference? Someone? Yep. What was that?
Platform is the stuff underneath.
I did not.
Application is the ERP functionality.
Yep, right. And the platform, since update 3, has been sealed. So it comes as binaries only. The ERP application still comes, the hot fixes, and it comes to you as source code X++, mainly because of overlayering. And so platform updates are binary updates, and they are required to be current within a year of a platform coming out. And since they're binary, they're sort of ready to install. So if they get out of date like that, they will be, you'll be communicated with and they'll be installed. But of course, you'll be keeping your platform current and picking up hot fixes and things like that on your own. And in that case, that would not become an issue. And if you remember before platform update 3, oh, go ahead.
If you have customers need to be up like 24/7, does it just get a warning 5 days before and down
It won't be moved. Go ahead, Chandru. Can you repeat the question? Oh, yeah. I'll repeat it. The question was, if the customer is 24/7, what do you do about the 8 hours downtime, five days notice and 8 hours downtime? Do you move the production to a different data center while that production, or while it being maintenance?
So for now, we don't have that capability that we can move your environment to other region for the maintenance purpose. But we mentioned here like an 8-hour window. It's not that we'll take down your environment for 8 hours down, but we will be doing within that 8 hours. So like if you are doing security patching, then it takes generally 1.5 hours or 2 hours. So your environment will be only down for 1.5 or 2 hours. Can you repeat, please? Yeah. Yeah, so we are working on other features like making like this maintenance activity as a zero downtime, where we won't have to take the system down, like security patching or any infrastructure management. So for now, down the line, there will be only outage during servicing the applications, not for the infrastructure related activities.
Yeah, so there are requirements. The short answer is that there are requirements to keep the platform current, and it kind of comes back to security and things like that. And they're good improvements that help your system, bug fixes and things like that. There is one other category of platform fixes that are mandatory. We'll talk about those in a minute. And then the other part is application updates, and that is for the ERP, the accounting side. And those are not required, and because they come as X++, the partner or customer has to initiate them by installing them, doing a build, and then deploying it to the sandbox, and then marking it as a release candidate to production. So this is for platform. You can see at the top in purple. So we publish hotfixes and new platforms, I guess, but we're talking about, and for the most part, they are binary, and they can be applied directly to the sandbox for validation. And then after it's validated, you can mark that package as a release candidate and install it on and schedule it to be installed on production. Sorry, you can't install it on production. The critical security updates are the OS level updates, and the customer and partner don't need to do anything except accept the downtime for those. Platform roll-ups are what I was talking about earlier. I missed the name, but those are the things that are sort of required, and you have to be current within the 12 months, and we'll plan them, and you just have to do the validation. And then the cloud infrastructure updates are also done in that planned window, and you don't need to do any action on those either. Any questions on platform? No?
How did Microsoft foresee that after within 12 months? Will it just be fixed downtime which can't be moved anymore? Or?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So the question is, how do we enforce the requirement that they be updated within 12 months? And what if can you just keep putting off the downtime? And I don't think you can. Okay. Go like this.
It's part of the agreement.
Yeah, it's part of the agreement. So, and we'll work with you, right? We can't just force it, but we need. But back way in the back there. It's not that different, except that the time, right, it probably hasn't been a year yet, right? And we would be working with you to encourage you to be relatively current when you go live, because everything is quite a bit easier before you go live, right? So, but in general, if it got to that point, if the project was more than a year, I don't think any of that would really change. Other than the other variable is that production doesn't come along until later in the project. Although we always require you, however you got UAT to your current UAT, if you started on update, like right now, platform 4 is current, right? If you deployed your UAT as 1611, app 7.1, and platform update 3, now you could deploy it as 1611 plus platform update 4. But however your UAT was done, we would have you follow the same pattern for production. We would have you install 3 and then upgrade to 4 so that they are as similar as possible. Does that make sense? There's one over in this area, or? Oh, okay, great. Okay, so now this is the application side, and these are not required, but it's very similar. We publish hot fixes in LCS, and they're for the app side, they're X++, and you have to install them on a dev environment, check them into VS, TS, do a build, and all that. Yep.
One request on the hotfix publishing on LCS. Would it be possible to add a release date when the hotfix was released?
Okay, yeah, I think certainly we've heard that it's not clear, it's very subtle, like let's see what it would be, like update 1 and 2, they don't say operations through 65, the version isn't clear, and the dates and which ones you have is not clear, so we'll take that, it's a good thing. We have heard it before, but it's yeah. Is there one more? Okay. The app does have some binary stuff, and all the binaries are combined now, but like the MR designer is a binary part of the application, and so there's a few things like that, but they're combined now, mostly for consistency. So we generally they're just marked as binary updates now, but it's primarily the platform, but there are some app things in there. And because they're binary, they're going to more of a roll-up where they do one a month, and you pick up, like especially MR does that, I know. You pick up MR fixes. You don't get, because the effort to create the whole install for one change is a lot, so. Yep, so then if there's a major release, like the fall application, 1611 was a major release of the ERP. Different versions of X++, all the X++, since in that case, it came out in February, I think. So, there's a lot of changes. Code upgrade for X++, again, all that is because of overlayering. So that's why the push to seal the application eventually. How many of you have active implementation projects? Did you have one when the binary also had X++? Do you think that's an improvement for the better, having no platform X++? Yeah, right. It's very good. It makes things so much easier. And obviously the customer would plan that, and you'd be a big part of that because it's a good amount of effort right now. Customizations are similar. You have to validate them in the sandbox, and that's really, everybody has customizations, so a major release would include the customizations.
So I would like to add one more point here in this one. If you are implementing, you also consider where you are in the implementation project, right? Perhaps we release a new platform update and also perhaps application. It's not like you are going quickly and go and deploy, right? If you are in a, let's say, a UAT process that you are testing with all your key users and validating process, maybe it's not the right time to do it, but at some point you will need to do it. So it's considered where you are in the project and when makes sense to uptake these updates. But the main message here is that it's important that you plan on those, and sooner or later you will need to uptake those, right? And for production environments, let's say when you go live, especially when you are getting close, we will work with you to review all the readiness and verify, okay, it makes sense that you take a new platform update or perhaps application update when you are so close to go live. Perhaps no, depending what you are implementing, right? So we will not force you to do that. But once you are live, well, you need to plan, okay, let's take all these updates. So it's also common sense here. It's not like we release, you need to take it. Yeah? But we work with you on all this process.
Yep. One final thing about that is that the platform updates don't require a data upgrade. They upgrade themselves, or they handle both sides of data and stuff. So they're quite a bit less intrusive that way, less effort. I kind of liken them to like a Windows update, right? Where Windows update usually doesn't have an effect on Microsoft Word. There's always stories, but in general it doesn't. And that's the idea with the platform, is that it's not to upset the ERP.
So next we have the next session is around the security and administrative access to the environments that are managed by the Microsoft. So internally we have like a couple of teams managing this environment. The first level of defense is our Microsoft support. So in such they don't have access to the environment. So they work through the telemetry logs and through the LCS for troubleshooting at the initial level. And then later if they need further assistance, they escalate to our DSC team, where we have like two teams, like a first defense and the second defense. First defense is the one which works on a quick basis based on the TSGs, and if they can resolve the issues faster, they can do it, else they can escalate to the tier 2. So these are the only teams who have the access to the environments, to the customers' production environments. So later further, if we need something, help from R&D team at the code level, that's where the engineering comes in picture, but they don't have direct access to the environment. So they work with us. So we do like a escort, like a screen sharing, or we work with them together. So access is only retained with the DSC team. It's, no one other than in the Microsoft gets the access to the production environment. So security and administrative access is strictly controlled over there. So others in the Microsoft, like outside of the engineering support or DSC, no one has the access to the production infrastructure.
So there is a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, just with regard to a hybrid deployment, which pieces would you be looking after? Only the hybrid database in the cloud, or is that all you'll be able to do part of that service?
Yeah, it depends on the implementation of hybrid. If it's like a data structure that lies on your on the on-premise, then probably that will be managed by you. But if it's like application side or web part, if managed in the cloud, then we will be managing that. Yeah, so it depends on the type of hybrid implementation is done. Next is about the business continuity with the hybridity and disaster recovery. So with the deployment of the production environment, out of the box, the day one environment is enabled for hybridity and disaster recovery. So in this sense, the Azure SQL database is replicated to a geo-replication pair every 5 seconds, and the Azure storage blob is also replicated. So behind the scenes, when there's any change into the VM, we take the backup of the VHD and ship it to the DR site, so that in the event of the disaster, we can bring up the VMs up and get the AX system up running for you guys.
This is another big difference between 2012 implementations and Dynamics 365 for operations. It's in this scenario, basically, the customer and you as a partner, you don't need to request any specific task to enable all of this. For production environment, by default, we enable this capability. In previous, let's say, war in 2012, we used to have a special project just to enable all this disaster recovery, and even the customer needed to pay for those type of things. In this scenario, it's part of the subscription. It's by default.
So this is data backup and retention. So for the production and the sandbox environment, so we do the automatic backups and they are retained for 5 days. So we can restore to the recovery point of 5 minutes. So one bullet point is that the backups do not leave the LCS project. This is for the privacy and data protection. So whenever if you need in data, we can copy it from the production to sandbox or sandbox to sandbox for your need like a troubleshooting or testing or any other ad hoc type of reporting if you have to do. Yeah.
Are there any options to keep a backup longer than 45 days?
Yeah, so right now we don't have, but we are working on the options of a long recovery retention period that Azure is supporting. So there might be down the line we'll be enabling that feature specifically for the cases where for the tax purposes or legal purposes if we want to retain for the longer time, we should be able to.
You said this was for sandbox and production. Is that included for if you have multiple sandbox environments?
Yeah, tier 2 and above. Yeah.
Yeah. The question is if this applies also for sandbox and in addition to production, correct?
Yeah, like I have 3 sandbox.
Yeah.
This file, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, for Tier 2 environments and above, we have SQL Azure in those environments, and those are capabilities of SQL Azure. So the answer is yes for those type of environments. And this is also connected to one of the questions that can we use production environment to do an UAT? Well, this is one of the things that you need to consider, depending how close you are to production, right? Because you have a 35 days time window. If your UAT is beyond 35 days, because we use a capability to do point-in-time restore, if you pass those 35 days, you cannot go back to the blank stage, right? Yeah.
Are you going to talk about a customer Azure subscription versus a Microsoft add-on and maybe some of the differences there and some of the price points as far as, it might be a little bit cheaper for them to utilize their own Azure subscription versus a Microsoft add-on? And what are some of the do's and don'ts around the customer Azure subscription? I don't know if you're going to touch upon that at all.
The question is, we are going to cover the add-on subscription, the add-on scenario, and also introducing the customer-owned Azure subscription into the project. We don't have it on the scope, but I think if we have time, we can talk a little bit of it. But there are some things that you need to consider in that. Okay?
Yep. Next, yes.
So, when all the topics that Chandler explained in the previous slides are connected to dynamic service engineering team. Every time that you do a service request in LCS, it's basically you are interacting with his team. But there are scenarios that you need to drive through support because we need to, let's say, investigate more about other aspects of your environment that they don't look directly. One of the cases that for example, you notice that who can access the environment? Well, in some of the scenarios, we need a support ticket, right? Because we need to document who is accessing those production environments, for example. We respect tremendously the privacy. We don't even if we manage those environments, we don't have access to them. So in many cases, we need to trigger support team. For support team, we have also the consideration that, and there is one session that explains more about the support plans, but in support you need to consider also the SLAs that you have based on the plan that you have for the implementation. By default, for example, just to give you an example, if the project has enterprise agreement as part of the licensing, those projects has the base subscription support plan, meaning that in that scenario, the SLA is 1 business day, for example. Every time that you create a support ticket, the longest that you will get is the next business day to get a response. But if there is something that, let's say, you typically require faster response from support, you have other plans that you can get faster SLAs. So depending the support plan is the speed and let's say the time that this team will take care to answer your request. But we should not confuse what DC or dynamic service engineering does with what support does. Infrastructure related topics are with the team based on all the scenarios that we just discussed, but all the other scenarios that you can have in your implementation, it's with support. So it's important to select the proper channel to communicate with us. Yeah. This summarizes the different, let's say, the most common scenarios that we have. Who performs that, let's say, that scenario, and the lead times that we have for each of them. So, and also answers the question of the downtime that you could expect at least on each of those scenarios. Here it depends, for example, code promotion, what it means. This is one of the difference also that we are continuously improving. If you were implementing 6 months ago, those lead times were higher. We recently optimized our process to deploy, for example, code, and now we can do it faster. Yeah, and I'm sure if you try those in your sandbox environment directly as a self-service, you will see perhaps downtimes of 1 hour and a half, depending what you are doing, but this much faster than used to be 6 months ago. So this is a continuous improvement, and we are always looking into the ways that how we can improve all these lead times, so that way you don't have to, let's say, disrupt your operation, especially if you are live. But this is also applicable when you are implementing, especially when you are doing data migration on weekends, for example, or you are preparing for a UAT and you need to deploy code. So how you can prepare during the weekend, but also deploy new code. So we are following all these scenarios closely, and we are looking for ways to improve all the time. So expect changes in this area constantly. And one way to learn about this type of improvements is at looking at your LCS project. There is a panel for notifications that it will show you what we are releasing for the current month. Let's say the January release or the February release. So every time that you go there, you will find answers in those areas that, okay, we are improving the way how to deploy code, or even new tools or functionality inside of LCS. So and also, this is also part of the feedback that you provide, because we are touching all the projects worldwide. We interact with all implementation teams in different levels. We receive the feedback, and we are constantly passing that information, okay, how we can make it better. So keep providing that feedback in all the different implementations that you have, because this is a way for us to compare and say, okay, we are observing this pattern in 10, 25 projects across the globe, so that's becoming a problem. We need to react faster or even plan in advance.
Are these lead times also applicable to multi-tenant solution, edge, hybrid solutions?
The question if these lead times applies for hybrid solutions using edge or the new aspects that we're seeing, we are too early for that. Right now, as you saw, we are testing, working in architecture. At some point, we are going to need to match this list with, okay, how it looks like with all those scenarios, and what is the impact of those type of scenarios, right? So as we get more information on that, we are going to share with you through LCS or the different forums that we have, but we are too early for that right now.
To add to that, the whatever features here we are seeing there, we need the lead time and downtime, but down the line we are working to see if we can make this as a self-service where you can manage yourself. Like example, suppose database refresh in the sandbox. So right now you need to submit a request to do that, but down the line in a couple of months we will be releasing as a self-service where you will be able to do it at your own space when you need it. So down the line, by the time you implement a hybrid solution, maybe then 6 months or a year down, probably most of them might be the self-service features where you can manage yourself.
Yeah, and also introduce tools. That scenario that we just mentioned in the database. We mention all the time sandbox or production, meaning tier 2 and above that has SQL Azure. But what about other environments? If we have data on let's say a goal environment or a configuration environment, right now it's very manual to move from those SQL Server type of environments to sandbox. Yes, we have a documentation how to do it, but it's manual, a very manual process. So we are looking to introduce tools to do that, so that way it's always same results and faster results. Yeah, so it's part of the update. Somebody has a question there.
How about the common data service? Is that included in this package support? And is there anything you think of when we have Dynamics 365 CRM sales, Office 365, all the ecosystem working together? I think we're talking about operations here, right? How will the support work together?
Yeah, the question is what will happen when we introduce other more complex solutions like a CRM using common data service to integrate? Because right now we are still developing, working on those things. For sure we will need to consider, okay, if I take one environment down, what happens with the other environment, right? We're going to stop integrating, or what will happen, right? So that's a good question and a question that we need to answer properly once we are able to put all these pieces together. But for sure, we need to consider those scenarios.
Yeah,
it's
so
very
we have
important.
Manali behind the scenes, so she can help you answer the questions over there.
Yeah, thank you, Manali. Manali, she's behind the LCS functionality, so good information. Okay? Okay, so we covered this content. I would like to answer the question connected to what happens when we bring our own subscription. In this scenario, there are some implications that you need to consider in addition to the cost, but also to the way to use those, let's say, on a model that, yes, we have our environments as part of the subscription, but I want to introduce my own subscription to deploy environments using the cloud-hosted environments capability in LCS. You can use that capability for sure, and you can, let's say, take care of enable, disable those environments, because there is those environments gets billed by the usage. It's pay as you go, so you need to be careful with those, but also in the way that how you use those environments. Yeah, for example, for a development scenario, you can use that scenario. But also you can download an image or have your environment as part of the subscription. For each of these three scenarios, there are some limitations and capabilities that you need to be aware. Like, for example, when you download the image, you need to do additional configuration, but you have limitations on how to talk to LCS. Or if you are using cloud-hosted environments, you need to be careful on the cost of let's say, every time that you run that environment. So we had found that in many scenarios, it's proven that it can be costly to use that way if you are going to have one environment running all the time. So it will be cheaper for the team to enable an environment as part of the subscription. And to answer specifically how, the team that engaged with you in the Fast Track program can help you to answer and run some scenarios with you and compare. If you do cloud hosted, it will cost you this amount for this type of usage compared to use a subscription. In addition, that you need to deal with other aspects, for example, when you download image, with licensing and other type of things. So the subscription environments, they are all inclusive. It contains everything that you need. In addition, that is already connected to the URLs.
So there's no real technical limitation of using the customer's Azure subscription, other than obviously as you get closer to production, you want a multi-tiered box because that's going to better replicate what production is going to be. But from a technical standpoint, there's really no limitation as far as LCS capabilities.
You cannot do you cannot create a a multi-box environment on your subscription.
Yep. So
And
you're always using SQL 2016.
right, and a demo has everything that a dev does, though. You can use a demo as a dev.
Yeah.
And we could, but if we had an empty database somewhere, we can move it across, you know, backpack or whatever, however we needed to, right?
An empty,
Well, if
an
we
Azure
wanted an
database?
empty data set, right, we can grab it from somewhere else. I'm not as worried about that, but I'm just looking for any kind of technical limitations from an LCS standpoint. But obviously, I know it's always going to be that single box deployment as opposed to the multi-tier.
Yeah, and the big difference that you correctly noted is that SQL Server and SQL Azure do not perform the same. So you want to do a bulkier testing on the sandbox environment with SQL Azure, because that'll give you a better. It's designed to be as much like production as possible.
So sorry.
No, just one other quick question. Could we, after the inception or the implementation project is created, could we have your team add more additional add-ons, or is that only at the inception of the implementation?
No, you can because things can change. Of course, there are some certain things to consider depending from where the license is coming. If you are reselling as a partner or if it's coming from an enterprise agreement. So there are certain things, but yes, we can. Yeah. You can do it, and because things can change, right? You can discover things in analysis phase that, we discovered that there is a huge animal that we need to solve and we need a performance test. So we need to deploy an environment just for that, right? So yes.
Who would we contact for that?
The license, well, basically it's the...
Just another add-on so we can see it available in like the queued up.
In the same process that the customer followed to acquire the license is the same way. And once that is activated, we will expose that as part of an environment in your project. And you will see a label that is add-on. Basically, it's an environment that you introduce in addition to the base subscription. Yeah. So in summary, cloud-hosted environments, it's for a small tasks or specific things that you need for a specific period of time, but you need to be careful with those so you don't get overbilled, but because you miss to turn off that environment.
Just regarding the service requests that you have here, is each one of those costed on a case-by-case basis? So if my customer, say, is there any difference between my customer asking for the same operation to be done 10 times in 2 months, as opposed to, once in a year? Are they paying for each one as it comes up?
Those are included in the subscription.
They're included no matter what the quantity is.
Right.
It's part of the service.
It's part of the service.
Yeah. So those are back to the original point. It's when we are talking about infrastructure, there are all the services that are included. Yeah.
Can you do a data refresh between 2 sandboxes?
Yes. The question is if we can do a data refresh between 2 sandboxes, assuming that sandbox is a tier 2 and above environment which has SQL Azure.
Yeah, like you won't see production in the target for the database refresh, right? But you'll see all the other tier 2 and above environments. And production is an option for the source. Right. The question was, can I get production data for my developers on their tier 1 environments? And there is a wiki article on copying a SQL Azure, a tier 2 environment database from the sandbox, say, not from production, of course, to a tier 1. And once it's on a SQL server, of course, you can distribute it to others.
Another variable to consider in that scenario is that depending the size of the database of the production environment, you need to consider if you can support in your dev environment at that size, right? So there are things to consider in that process, but yeah.
Right, there's a lot of things to consider when you do that, but it is available.
Okay, so is any other question that we could answer about the... Okay, so this summarize our presentation. Basically, what the objective was to clarify the different roles that we have in the communication with Microsoft, specifically on infrastructure, the things that dynamic service engineering takes care, and the scenarios that are out of the scope for them, and when you need to use support. Also to understand the different SLAs and let's say downtimes that you can expect depending the scenario, and how to approach dynamic service engineering. And this is part of the, let's say, common process when you are implementing and after go live. So with the time, we will be improving all this process on a way how to communicate better with customers, how to reduce times. But in general, all those things, we are going to publish continue publishing all these new capabilities, at least regarding tooling in LCS, and you will see receive other ways to, for example, with the fast track program that works in your implementation, fresh information on what is happening here. We deliver also on a monthly basis, every 2 weeks, in the fast track program, tech talks. Basically, those tech talks, it's a refresh of all this information. Every month the content is different, but this is certainly one of them. So things that we are discussing today, perhaps next month can be a little bit different, and a way to keep updated is joining those tech talks. So all of you, if you are implementing, have access to all that information. Yeah. So keep coming back, and most importantly, provide feedback, because it's a way for us to improve these tools. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. We finalize this session. Thank you.